Hello and a very warm welcome to a brand new episode of Global Scan, a show that gives you a 360-degree view of major global developments and brings out India's foreign policy perspective towards the neighborhood and beyond. On the show today, US President Donald Trump announces that peace talks with Afghan Taliban are dead after pulling out of secret talks with the insurgent group recently. Pakistan ends up embarrassing itself at the 42nd UN Human Rights Session in Geneva, and UK decides to reinstate post-study work visa, which could benefit international students looking for jobs after graduation in the UK. All that and more in Global Scan. I'm Unman Bhattacharya. First up, the headlines. US calls off peace talks with Afghan Taliban after the insurgent group claims responsibility for Kabul blast. US President Donald Trump says US peace talks with Taliban are dead. Pakistan exposed again on the global platform. Its Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi mentions Kashmir as Indian state of Jammu and Kashmir at the UNHRC in Geneva. India rejects Islamabad's demand for international probe, says India's decision on Article 370 is its sovereign right and entirely an Indian matter. Major boost for international students wishing to work in the UK. UK announces it will allow foreign students to stay for 2 years after graduation to find work. Italy's new government survives a key test, wins a vote of confidence, allowing it to govern, prepares to draft a painful budget law which must be approved by Parliament by the end of the year. Ground Zero ceremony marks the 18th anniversary of 9/11 terror attacks. Commemorations held across America. Nearly 3,000 people were killed that fateful day and thousands others were injured. Our top focus in this edition of Global Scan, US President Donald Trump's announcement on Twitter that he cancelled the secret talks with Afghan Taliban after the insurgent group claimed responsibility for a recent terror attack in Kabul stunned the diplomatic community. Since then, while the Taliban has threatened serious consequences for the US, Trump says the US has upped the ante on Afghan Taliban like never before, and the talks are now dead.
Just before the insurgents and Washington would strike a deal, President Donald Trump called off peace talks with Afghan Taliban. A deal reached after months of negotiation with representatives from the insurgent movement just ended. President Donald Trump abruptly cancelled peace talks with Taliban after the insurgent group claimed responsibility for an attack in Afghanistan's capital that claimed the lives of a US soldier and 11 other people. US President Donald Trump tweeted saying, "An attack in Kabul that killed one of our great soldiers and 11 other people. I immediately cancelled the meeting and called off peace negotiation." What kind of people would kill so many in order to seemingly strengthen their bargaining position? It only made it worse. If they cannot agree to a ceasefire during these very important peace talks and would even kill 12 innocent people, then they probably don't have the power to negotiate a meaningful agreement anyway. How many more decades are they willing to fight? And just after the peace talks was cancelled, India's permanent representative to United Nations, Syed Akbaruddin, on Wednesday said that India supports the UN Secretary General's call for direct talks between Taliban and the government.
We welcome the opportunities for peace and reconciliation emerging from the various efforts. We therefore support the Secretary General's call for direct talks. Peace and reconciliation cannot go forward in an atmosphere of terror.
The United States would withdraw almost 5,000 troops from Afghanistan and close 5 bases within 135 days under draft peace accord agreed with Taliban. The US currently has about 14,000 troops in Afghanistan alongside international troops to advise and assist Afghan defense forces and to fight extremist groups like the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda. As As per the agreement between the both, the US would withdraw over 5,000 of the 14,000 American troops in the country within 135 days, and the insurgents would agree to prevent Afghanistan from being used as a launchpad for global terror attacks by Al-Qaeda and others. Bureau Report, DD India.
So US President Donald Trump stunned the diplomatic community on the 7th of September when he tweeted those series of tweets on how he decided to cancel secret talks with Afghan Taliban leadership. This is his tweets bequeathed to almost everyone. The major Taliban leaders and separately the president of Afghanistan were going to secretly meet me at Camp David on Sunday. They were coming to the United States tonight. Unfortunately, in order to build false leverage, they admitted to a terror attack in Kabul that killed one of our great soldiers and 11 other people. I immediately cancelled the meeting and called off peace negotiations. What kind of people would kill so many in order to seemingly strengthen their bargaining position? They did not, and they did not strengthen their bargaining position, only made it worse. If they cannot agree to a ceasefire during these very important peace talks and would even kill 12 innocent people, then they probably don't have the power to negotiate a meaningful agreement anyway. How many more decades are they willing to fight? So these three tweets by Donald Trump put out the facts before the whole world. So Trump cancelled the secret meeting with Afghan Taliban. Peace talks that sought to end the United States' 18-year war in Afghanistan were called off with those three tweets. Trump had invited Afghan Taliban leaders to a secret meeting at Camp David, and that did raise a lot of eyebrows in the diplomatic community the world over. Trump cancelled the meeting after Taliban claimed responsibility for a terror attack in Kabul that happened a couple of days before that decision was taken by Donald Trump to call off the talks. The U.S. recalled its special envoy for Afghanistan as well in order to make an assessment of the situation because things strained dramatically after that decision. Several rounds of talks held earlier in a Gulf state of Qatar, and that was the basis of the in-principle agreement that was reached earlier between the Afghan Taliban and the United States. The Afghan government reacted saying real peace is possible if Taliban agrees to ceasefire and direct talks. So these are the two demands that the Afghan government is now making. Afghan government is saying we believe in a process led and owned by Afghan government and people. That's because the Afghanistan government has been sidelined in all these talks that took place in the Gulf state of Qatar. The US has reacted saying Taliban failed to keep up with preliminary conditions, including reducing violence, and that is why they decided to call off the talks. 11 September, Donald Trump said US will hit Taliban harder than ever. This was also the 18th anniversary of the 9/11 terror attacks in the US. On 11 September, he also said that over the last 4 days, US troops hit the enemy harder than they have been hit before, and that will continue. So that's how Donald Trump said that the US has now upped the ante against Afghan Taliban. 9 September, Trump declares the US peace talks with the Taliban are now dead. So that is the big headline that came on the 9th of September. Top US negotiator on the 2nd September announced a peace deal in principle. This is about the dead US-Afghan Taliban deal. Under the in-principle deal, US agreed to withdraw 5,400 of the 14,000 US troops within 135 days. It decided to withdraw troops from the 5 bases that it has in Afghanistan. Insurgents would in return agree to prevent Afghanistan from being used as launchpad for global terror attacks. So this was the quid pro quo that was supposed to take place. Security situation in Afghanistan. US currently has around 14,000 troops in Afghanistan alongside international troops. So this is the kind of security situation there in Afghanistan. At its peak between 2010 and 2012, US for the first time had more than 1 lakh soldiers in Afghanistan. Today that number is 14,000. The idea was to bring that number further down to around 8,000 odd. 6 troops have been killed in Afghanistan this year alone. So US troops and other international troops are facing casualties. Taliban controls more territory than at any time since 2001 US invasion. So that says a lot about the control that Taliban has in Afghanistan. Since 2001, around 3,500 members of international forces have died in Afghanistan. Since 2001, over 2,300 US troops have also died in Afghanistan. So these international forces have suffered quite a bit since the US-led invasion in 2001. UN said in February 2019 that over 32,000 Afghan civilians have died since 2001, since the US-led invasion happened after 9/11 in Afghanistan. And this is the government of India's stand that Afghanistan government should be part of the peace process. Ravish Kumar, MEA spokesperson, said recently that we are of the view that all sections of Afghan society, including legitimately elected government, should be part of the peace process. We have supported the election process, which is about to unfold later this month. Our point of view is that any process should respect the constitutional legacy and it should not lead to any ungoverned spaces where terrorists and their proxies can relocate. So that's the reaction that came in from the government of India recently. India saying that the process in Afghanistan should be Afghan-owned, controlled and led. And so India basically saying that the government of Afghanistan should have an equal say and a stake in any peace talks with the Taliban. Joining us now is a guest in the studio. I'm pleased to introduce Navtej Sarna, former Indian ambassador to the United States of America. Welcome, Mr. Sarna, to Global Scan. Where does all this leave the peace process in Afghanistan, and what can one expect in terms of US military presence going forward?
Well, that raises the question whether a peace process, a genuine peace process, was really on in the first place. It's been said, and the contours of the deal that have come out show that this was more a negotiation of withdrawal rather than a negotiation for general peace. In the short run, certainly, I would say, and given President Trump's remarks after he cancelled the talks, I think we can expect even more violence in Afghanistan. In fact, Afghanistan over the last year and now has been probably suffering its worst period of civilian violence since all this began. I think we can expect a greater conflict situations. Not to say that this would not have happened if the so-called deal had gone through and the US withdrawal would have taken place.
Is it then curtains on the talks entirely, or when the new dispensation takes over after elections in Afghanistan for the post of the president on the 28th of September, do you expect the new dispensation to pick up the threads from where the US administration left?
Well, I think you're talking of two different things. One, the first question is whether the US will revive these talks with the Taliban. For the moment, President Trump has said that they are dead. And there is a certain amount of dissatisfaction at the way all this happened within the American system. In fact, the House Foreign Relations Committee has asked Ambassador Khalilzad to appear before it and give them details of the deal that was being planned. So whether the US administration would pick up the threads again at some stage, difficult to say, but cannot be ruled out, because President Trump would certainly like to negotiate a withdrawal before the 2020 elections, so he can claim that he's kept in his promise of bringing the boys home. Whether the Taliban will come to the table again, given that at the moment they would be pretty miffed from the statements they have made. They have said even today that the deal was done, and they are very, very shocked and dismayed at the way President Trump has reacted. So whether they will come to the table again, and if they do, then getting an agreement is going to get that much tougher than what the Americans may have got at this stage. Now, whether the Afghan government, after its own elections, will be able to reach out for a national consensus depends upon what the government is, what is the legitimacy and the strength of the elections, what is the credibility of the elections and its results.
India has never recognized the Taliban as a legitimate actor in Afghanistan. So how does all this play out insofar as India's interest is concerned in the region?
Well, I think as far as India's interest is concerned, probably the fact that the talks have been called off is a good thing, because we have been holding on to the centrality of the Afghan government, the constitutional processes, the need for an Afghan-led and Afghan-owned process, and this certainly was not. This would have meant bringing in, it meant firstly that the Afghan government was completely out of the loop. President Ghani's or his people were involved in the 9 rounds of the Doha talks. This would also have meant that the Taliban would have done a power sharing and come into the whatever interim government would have been formed, certainly not President Ghani's government, they would have certainly come into the interim government from some sort of back door, and this certainly would not have been good for us. So while I think nothing is a victory here, but certainly this is an opportunity for India to press vigorously what it needs to see in Afghanistan and how we need to see it.
Are the dead talks a setback to Pakistan, which was playing a key role of mediation and did get Taliban on the table?
Well, not only that, I think it's a setback because Pakistan controls the Taliban. And if Taliban had come into power sharing and hold governmental positions, then certainly Pakistan's influence in Afghanistan and by definition its stand against us would have gathered strength. So for the moment at least, that's been put on the back foot.
Was Pakistan, you think, playing a Kashmir-Afghanistan game, trying to get the US on its side on the Kashmir issue, while at the same time extracting concessions from the United States on the issue of Afghanistan as well, in lieu of what Pakistan has done insofar as the peace talks are concerned?
Well, you know, with the advantage of hindsight, I would tend to agree with you. The fact that Imran Khan was in the Oval Office when President Trump made all those remarks about possible mediation on Kashmir, yes, perhaps at that moment what was topmost in President Trump's mind was getting the Afghan deal, getting a big Camp David moment, waving a piece of paper that he has bought peace for his times in Afghanistan, and perhaps in that process he wanted to go the extra mile for Imran Khan and made those remarks. It's quite possible. It's also quite possible that, you know, having made those remarks, he may not have kept to what he said. But yes, broadly, I would tend to agree with you that there was the instrumentality of Pakistan on the Afghan question was certainly top in their minds for the last few weeks.
Has this also poured cold water on any Pakistan hopes of averting being blacklisted at the FATF? Because many believe that there was a link between what Pakistan was doing for the US in Afghanistan to the prospect of it getting blacklisted in October by the FATF.
Well, the FATF has its own processes, but certainly in terms of the perception of Pakistan as a supporter of terrorism, that perception would have become stronger because the Taliban and President Trump's very immediate cause that he gave was the attack in which 12 people died in Kabul, including one US soldier. But let us remember that was not the only attack. The attacks have been on the increase. The military offensive by the Taliban has been on the increase. There have been car bombs, etc., going on in Kabul even while the talks are on. So certainly this would strengthen the international community's perception that Pakistan remains the fountainhead of terrorism.
But when do you expect the cloud of uncertainty over what happens next in the region to obliterate?
I think we have to now look at the September 28 elections. We have to see how well these elections go. We have to see the kind of credibility that the new government comes in and enjoys. And we also have to keep a watch on the violence on the ground. Now, how far the United States can, having brought things to this point, how far the United States can handle that kind of violence in collaboration with the Afghan forces is something that will be critical.
Thank you for having joined us, Mr. Sarna, on Global Scan. In more news now, in yet another desperate attempt to internationalize the Kashmir issue and peddle lies in order to mislead the international community on Kashmir, Pakistan raised the Kashmir issue at the 42nd UN Human Rights Session in Geneva. Pakistan's bid was met with a resolute response from India, and in the process, Pakistan ended up saying what India has been saying for decades, that Jammu and Kashmir is an Indian state.
The Indian state of Jammu and Kashmir. The Indian state of Jammu and Kashmir.
Truth has its own ways of coming out. And here it comes straight from the horse's mouth. Pakistan Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi has finally said what India has been saying for decades. But Islamabad has always been refusing to accept this reality. After the abrogation of Article 370, Pakistan is crying foul on global platform. But its own ministers are accepting the truth. But during the ongoing 42nd UN Human Rights session, Pakistan Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi mentioned Kashmir as Indian state of Jammu and Kashmir in Geneva.
The Indian state of Jammu and Kashmir. The Indian state of Jammu and Kashmir.
India strongly responded. Vijay Thakur Singh, Secretary in the Ministry of External Affairs, said the decision on J&K were taken by our parliament and enjoys widespread support. These were sovereign decisions and is entirely internal to India.
The decisions were taken by our parliament after a fully televised debate and enjoys widespread support. These were sovereign decisions entirely internal to India. No country can accept interference in its internal affairs, certainly not India. Despite challenging circumstances, Jammu and Kashmir civil administration is ensuring basic services, essential supplies, mobility and connectivity. Democratic processes have been initiated, restrictions are being eased continuously, temporary preventive measures were needed to ensure security in the face of credible threats of cross-border terrorism.
She also said India has suffered greatly on account of state-sponsored terrorism. It is time to collectively take decisive and firm action against terror groups who threaten the fundamental human right to life. Exercising its right to respond to Pakistan Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi's statement at UNHRC, First Secretary in the MEA, Vibresh Aryan, said Article 370 was a temporary provision of Indian Constitution.
We are not surprised at the Pakistan's hysterical statements with false, fabricated narratives aimed to politicize and polarize this forum. Some Pakistan leaders have even gone as far as to call for jihad and to encourage violence both inside Jammu and Kashmir and in third countries in order to paint a picture of genocide which they know is far from reality.
The Indian diplomat from Jammu and Kashmir also said that Pakistan's nefarious designs will never succeed because the people of India are united in their determination to preserve our territorial integrity along with our core values of democracy, tolerance and unity in diversity. Pakistan has once again been exposed on the global platform. But will it act now or not remains to be seen. With inputs from Abhishek Jha, DD India.
In a major boost for international students, the UK government has announced a new 2-year post-study work visa route from next year. Now, students from anywhere can work or even look for work at any skill level. After the 2 years, they will be able to switch on to the skilled work visa if they find a job which meets the skill requirement of the route. Under current rules introduced by former Prime Minister Theresa May, students are only allowed to stay for 4 months after they finish their degree. As protesters gear up for fresh demonstrations, embattled Hong Kong leader Carrie Lam promises to prioritize housing and people's livelihoods. Hong Kong is facing its first recession in a decade as a result of the protests. Multiple events and conferences have been cancelled and the number of visitors plunged 40% in August. The city's premier women's tennis event, scheduled for October, has been postponed. Meanwhile, China says Hong Kong is now its internal matter, even as Britain says it has a legal responsibility to ensure that China abides by its obligations under the joint declaration. With a promise to bring a new era of reforms in Italy, the new Italian cabinet, led by Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte, won the final and definitive confidence vote in the Senate on Tuesday with 169 votes in favour, 133 against and 5 abstentions. The Italian Prime Minister on Monday had already received the first confidence from the lower house with a larger majority of votes. Conte outlined to senators some key points of the political programme for the remaining legislature, showing a will to implement a partial shift from the previous government's action. After winning the confidence motion, he promised the cabinet would open the way to a new and hopefully decisive season of reforms and would move in accordance with the European Union. The cabinet now faces the key challenge to keep everyone happy with Budget 2020.
Reform plays the core role in Italy, which we should do everything to fulfill. We hope EU rules could help Italy and the whole Europe promote economic growth, especially the sustainable development.
The American flag was unfurled on the west side of the Pentagon. The bell of hope rang out at St. Paul's Chapel in New York, and millions mourned on the fateful day of 11th of September. It was on this day 18 years ago that the 9/11 terror attack happened, when hijacked jetliners crashed into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center, killing around 3,000 people. As the United States observed the 18th anniversary of the deadliest attack on U.S. soil, relatives of the victims gathered at the site of the former World Trade Center in Lower Manhattan for the annual commemoration ceremony to honor the victims. Joining them were local and national politicians, police, firefighters and other first responders. Before the ceremony in the church courtyard, family members and friends of those who died in the World Trade Center attacks arrived at the Ground Zero site for a remembrance service put on by the National September 11 Memorial and Museum. As in all the years since the attacks, the names of the nearly 3,000 victims were read by family members as others gathered along the edge of the reflecting pools to place flowers and remember their loved ones. Suicide has become the second leading cause of death among young people globally, with one person taking their own life every 40 seconds. The World Health Organization said in a report. The report released by WHO early this week suggested that more people die by suicide every year than in war. According to the report, for people in the age group of 15 and 29 years, it is the second leading cause of death after road injury, while among girls in the age group of 15 and 29, it is the second biggest killer after maternal conditions. The WHO in its analysis marked the ingestion of pesticides as the leading way of committing suicide globally. The WHO pointed to studies in Sri Lanka where bans on pesticides have led to a 70% drop in suicides and an estimated 93,000 lives saved between 1995 and 2015. The scientist at the Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse, Dr. Alexandra Fishman, said that overall close to 8 lakh people die by suicide every year, which is more than those who are killed by malaria or breast cancer or by war or homicide.
We see that there are an estimated 800,000 deaths from suicide in the world every year, and this translates to about 1 death every 40 seconds globally. Suicide is the second leading cause of death among the age group of 15 to 29-year-olds. Notably, for young girls, 15 to 19-year-old, we have suicide as the second leading cause of death.
In an incredibly exciting finding, astronomers have for the first time discovered water in the atmosphere of a planet orbiting a distant star outside a solar system with Earth-like temperatures that could support life. K2-18b, which is 8 times the mass of Earth, is now the only exoplanet known to have both water and temperatures that could be potentially habitable, according to a study published in the journal Nature Astronomy. A unique forest exhibition called For Forest, set up in a soccer stadium in Australia, is attracting environment lovers these days. The forest has been set up by 2 artists, Klaus Littmann, along with his partner Enzo Enea, who planted around 300 trees in Klagenfurt's 30,000 capacity UHRC stadium for the public to see. Opened with a message that one day nature might only be enjoyed in a museum-like environment, the theme has been inspired by Max Paintner's 1970s painting.
The painting was from Max Paintner in the 70s, when he was already thinking about this theme, about industrialization and what's going to happen with nature. And Klaus Littmann took the theme on him. I see the problems, you know, in Asia, in China, how the cities are built up, and there is not so much green, and people need nature. You know, this is what we need, because nature doesn't need us.
The forest exhibition is open to the public till 27th October. We leave you here with the glimpses of the exhibition. Namaskar.